So I just want to welcome everyone to the breakout for Mobile CSP. Again, we're happy to have you here with us tonight and talking about how to do Mobile CSP in an online or hybrid sessions. And I just want to remind everyone that the parking lot is available. I have not personally had a chance to take a look since we've been presenting, but hopefully if you have questions, definitely put them in there. And we have the chat as well. We'll take a look at the parking lot a little bit later and try to address questions before we dismiss for the night. So with further ado, we wanted to start this part of the session just by talking a little bit about how you can deliver the Mobile CSP curriculum online or in a hybrid manner. And the very first thing we wanted to remind everyone of is that we do have a curriculum overview document that has been made available to you. And this document will look very familiar. In prior years, if you've worked with Mobile CSP, you know that we've had a Google Doc that has been available. We have transitioned over to doing a Google spreadsheet instead. So hopefully you'll find this helpful when you're trying to adjust your schedule, right? So if you have a slightly longer classes, for example, you can move maybe lessons around. I know with 90-minute lessons, we typically suggest that you do the tutorials for App Inventor at the same time, same day that you do the projects, for example. So doing Paint Pot tutorial, Paint Pot projects in the same class period if you have 90 minutes with your students. So hopefully using this being in a spreadsheet, you'll be able to use that to adjust to your schedule as much as possible. And then also thinking about, we've had some questions that came in about meeting the new CSP framework. Many of you here tonight, I did get to see your faces in the updates or refresher PD that we had. So thank you to those who attended that. Those were, I think, all around great sessions. And we talked about these changes that were happening to Mobile CSP and CSP in general to accommodate for the new year. And with our lessons, we just want to acknowledge that we do have a change log that's available and that you can check the change log to see how we have changed Mobile CSP to align with the new framework changes. And then there are some topics that you may have heard have been removed. For example, hex conversions have been removed. We have made changes such as moving that to the Still Curious section of the lesson plans. So we just want to say that if you are looking at the curriculum overview and you know that you are pressed for time and there is a lesson maybe that has maybe one essential knowledge statement in it, note that we need to have you cover that for the purposes of meeting the College Board endorsement requirements. We're looking into ways of being able to maybe combine those with other lessons if possible. But if there is just one essential knowledge statement, just make sure you review that and you say, okay, well, what is this essential knowledge statement getting at? What from this lesson is essential to help students meet and understand that essential knowledge statement and the learning objective that it's covering. And you have the flexibility there on your end to adjust as needed to make sure your students are going through and meeting the requirements of the curriculum. So hopefully this curriculum overview helps you. We also want to recommend that when hosting online sessions that you check out Teach 1.8. Teach 1.8. We do recommend Zoom, right, as we've said earlier. And there are some tips in there for helping you get started if you're unsure how to use Zoom. And just some suggestions here is if you can, hold open office hours for your students to join in. Create this space that you're in the Zoom room and that they can come in and meet with you when they have questions. Schedule synchronous classroom sessions for students to all be online at the same time. And when you're scheduling those, be considerate of using more engaging activities rather than just doing a PowerPoint or Google slide presentation. For example, you may let students use breakout rooms, right? We really encourage that, especially if you're doing collaborative activities like pair programming and Pogo, which we're going to do with you tonight. Just remember that with the breakout rooms, you need the pro account or a license in order to use those. We also wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that different types of work that could happen in Mobile CSP and have you maybe consider that when you're planning for online versus hybrid. Students can do individual work in Mobile CSP. So there are things, content and lessons that we recommend them doing. You could have them do the tutorials, right? They could follow the text version or watch the videos, and they can complete those individually on their own. Sort of essentially implementing the flipped classroom approach in that aspect. And then when they come back with you in a synchronous session, for example, or in person, you can work with them to do the projects and enhancements that are happening. You can also have students do the self-check questions. All the self-check questions are there. You can monitor those with the teacher dashboard that we have available on Mobile CSP's student site. And you can monitor how they've answered those questions, which ones they've answered, what answer they chose, and get a feel for how students are doing. So sort of like those poll questions we saw earlier, but inside Mobile CSP. Mobile CSP, as you know, also has lots of collaborative work that can be done as well. If you're in synchronous sessions, use the breakout rooms. We definitely recommend that. You can also use collaborative docs and slides, both synchronously and asynchronously, to have students work together. And then just consider, you know, are there assignments that can be given where they're doing group work and it's done asynchronously. For example, Pogos. You can have them do Pogos, assign them to work with other students, and then have them meet as they can on their own time outside of the synchronous sessions to complete those. As I mentioned, we also have the monitoring of the student progress, so the teacher dashboard that is available. If you go, you should have access to that if you have requested. A gentle reminder that you'll only need to request access once. We have found that typically what happens is teachers will go to that site and it will appear that you don't have access, but it's just because you hadn't logged in recently. So just make sure you log in and then you navigate to this URL that's provided here to get to the teacher dashboard. If you know you don't have access, feel free to fill out the form and we'll get back to you with approving your access and instructions. Other ways that you can monitor student progress, I'm a big supporter myself of maintaining some type of digital portfolio. So this is different from the College Board site if you're teaching AP CSP. Having them use something like Google Sites to be able to create a portfolio to maintain their work. And then you can always go to their site and grade their work as is, like the reflection questions, for example, that at the end of each lesson can be posted to those portfolios, and you can go to their portfolio and grade their portfolio. You can also use learning management systems like Google Classroom or Canvas or Schoology. We have the reflection questions are in Google Docs that you can put in Google Classroom for your students to use. We do have a Canvas course that one of our facilitators has made available. Ben Smith has AP Mobile CSP, which is available in the Canvas Commons that you can check out. So consider how you can monitor student progress online with whatever learning management system you are using. Okay. And with that, we're going to transition here to maybe some little more exciting things and get you involved with some of these awesome activities that we have. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jen.
Thanks, Pauline. So earlier we talked a little bit about different kind of configurations for your online classes. I did just want to point out that Pogo Activities can be used in both a synchronous way or in an asynchronous way. So synchronous generally means that you have all students together at the same time in an online environment, so in Zoom like this at the same time. Asynchronous could take a couple of different kind of paths. You could have asynchronous where student groups might be able to meet synchronously on their own. So maybe you give out an assignment and they choose when to meet during the week and do the work in their groups. It could also be that the students work individually on their own schedule. All of these are options for Pogo activities, and there's some ideas or thoughts on different ways that you can adapt them. I'm going to share some of the resources tonight, but there's actually a great CS Pogo group, and we've put some of the links in the slide deck in the notes section to go find some additional resources on, excuse me, on using Pogo with computer science and in the online environment. So I encourage you to check those out if you're not getting exactly what you need tonight too, or to follow up with us via email later on. One thing that we have noticed is just because of the logistics of online learning, it often takes a little bit more time to run through the Pogo activities. So you may have to trim or reduce the number of questions in your worksheets or in the activities that you present to students. So just kind of keep that in mind. Pauline, can you switch to the next slide? Great, thank you. So a couple of thoughts about adapting Pogo activities, and then we'll get into an actual activity in breakout rooms. And first, Pauline, when I forgot to mention this to you earlier, I put 2 links to example documents there. Could you open those up? So could you open the Google Docs one first? So a great way to do this is via shared Google documents. Here's an example of a Google Doc that's an adaptation to the one that you may have printed out and handed out to students, or you may have assigned this Google Doc as part of Google Classroom or your learning management system or something like that. But this one is just an adaptation to run it during a synchronous session like this. So at the top, first thing, there's some slight adjustments to the roles. So you can see I put those in red. And we are going to come out within the next couple of days with a version of the Pogo team roles that's specifically for online. But you can see it's on this document here. And then if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see that the first page is just all about setting up the roles. And there's a table where each group can put their names in there, or you can assign folks ahead of time so that they're ready to go and they just need to find their name. If you look at the second page, this is the very first Unit 2 activity, Pogo activity that talks about algorithms and kind of those robot style questions from the computer science principles exam. So the model for this Pogo, so all Pogo activities use a model, and then they ask questions, inquiry-based questions around it to help students construct their own knowledge. So the model is around these types of questions, the 4 commands, and then a robot maze. And in here, one way of doing it, if you have like really short answers to questions, could be to create a table, and each group just puts their answers to those questions in the table. Another way to do it, if you want to go to the third page, Pauline, and this is an example where maybe you have a slightly longer questions, this might work better, is a table in just a slightly different format. So this is the one where they're asked to write an algorithm and not simply answer yes or no to the questions. This takes a little bit more work maybe to set up in advance, but just kind of gives you an idea of how you might do that synchronously. If you go back to the slides, we are going to use the Google Doc the Google Slides in just a minute, so I'm not going to walk through that one right now. I did want to point out that even when you have something like those Google Docs, you can use those asynchronously. Students can leave comments in there. You could have one set of like one Google Doc per group and things like that, or one set of Google Slides per group where they could be answering their questions and putting their information in. If you want to maybe a little bit better visual tracking of student answers, or if your school doesn't use Google Docs and you have to use Microsoft Word or things like that, you could have students use different colors to indicate who is doing what, so you get a little bit better idea of who is participating in those activities. And then one tool that I found out about, I haven't used it very much, but I thought it was really interesting, is something called Doctopus. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's an add-on to Google Docs, and what it allows you to do is create a spreadsheet with a roster, and you can set up groups in there. And then you can make copies of documents, and they can be automatically assigned to the groups and with the permissions and all of that. So that's seemed like a really slick tool to use for these Pogo activities, where maybe you create the template and then you send it out to everyone like that. I think a couple other tips, just thinking about Pogo in online environments. When we're in the classroom, we may not be as strict about time because we're walking around and we have a really clear sense of what's going on. When we're online, it's a little bit harder to move faster around the breakout rooms. And so I would suggest you give clear guidelines to students about how long you want them to spend on the activities, and you'll see that in the slides. You could also have students do some of the pre-work ahead of the synchronous time, so they could answer some of those questions before they got to the synchronous time. Each of the Pogo activities is structured, we're talking about that inquiry learning cycle. So usually the first couple of questions are lower on the Bloom's taxonomy, and those are the ones that you could assign ahead of time and ask them to answer. And then the ones that are later on are higher on the Bloom's taxonomy level, and the ones that you might want them to be present in the classroom as they're answering them. I'd also encourage you to be explicit about when you need groups to check in with you. So in the Google Doc version, on that last page, you saw there was a stop sign and it said check in with your instructor before progressing. Same thing in the slide deck, there's a little red message where it says, check in with your instructor before moving on to part 2. So just make sure that, the students are clear about those kinds of directions. Like I said, easier to check in when you're walking around in person. You may have to be more explicit about having them check in with you when you're online. And then you can also use formative assessments, in particular with like asynchronous, and you're wanting to make sure that students are understanding before you're moving on to the next module. That gives you a nice way, maybe a Google form to use as a quiz, or a quiz within your learning management system kind of idea. So I just want to take a quick peek at the chat and see if we had any questions right now. I think there's just one, Pauline, for you, maybe about the APCSP class name on Canvas Commons. I don't know if you know that, but if you would stop sharing your screen, I can share my screen, and I will walk us through our breakout rooms. So we are going to go into breakout rooms, and Alexis is going to set us up and send us in there. We will have 4 to a breakout room because they're a slightly larger group tonight, but you could do them in groups of 3. And in fact, it might be a little bit better in online to do slightly smaller groups, so there's a little less coordination going on. This is the slide deck we're going to use. Let me share my screen here. And I shared with you earlier the Google Docs version. This is just a Google Slides version of the same activity. So in the first one right here, it shows the Pogo roles again. When you get into your breakout rooms, we're just going to have you assign yourselves roles in order alphabetically by your first name. So if it was Alexis, Pauline, and myself in a room, Alexis would get to be the facilitator or the manager. I would be the spokesperson or presenter, and then generally what we do when we have 3 people in a group is we combine the quality control and the process analyst, so that's what Pauline would get to do. So that's how you would assign your roles in your group today. And this is our model that we're working with. So we have that move forward, rotate right, rotate left, and can move. If you're teaching this, you'd go into a little bit more information. You can see I've trimmed down the amount of text that's on the slides here because I'll be you would be talking about it. And then here's an example of one way that you could still be doing the Pogo activity, but you could do a quick check-in and say, use the annotate tool here, and students could, stamp on the true or false for each of these questions, those kinds of things. All right. So Pogo activities, I divided this up into 2 parts. We're just going to do part 1, but I put part 2 in there as well on the slide so you can see what it looks like. In interest of time, we're just going to take about 10 minutes in the breakout room, maybe a little bit less. We might have Alexis pull you back a little bit earlier because I think we're running a tad late here. But you'll see that each group has a set of 3 slides. So when you're in the breakout room, you should see that you go into like breakout room 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, depending on how many you have. And you just want to work on each slide and editing each of them. So you would exit out of present mode here, and everybody should have rights to edit, and your group can just go ahead and enter your text on each of those slides. So the first 3 here, slides 6, 7, and 8 are group 1, and then slides 9, 10, and 11 are group 2, and then 12 through 14 are group 3, etc. All right. Any questions about that? Okay, Alexis is going to send us into rooms then, and you will get maybe 7 minutes or so in the breakout rooms just to practice and play around and chat with each other about this. All right, we will see you in a bit. All right, welcome back. I think most of you are back in the main room now, so maybe just a couple of thoughts before we transition onto Pauline's part in her breakout room activities. So number one, I think just like it does in the regular in-person classroom, it probably takes a little bit more time at the beginning of year just to set up Pogo processes and make sure everybody understands what they're doing, but definitely possible. I don't know if you could tell or if you were looking at this, but one of the things that I actually think is really great about online Pogo, and especially using like a slide deck or a shared Google Doc, I could see what each of the groups was doing, and some of the groups were doing some things, other groups were not. So I could very clearly look and see what the work was, and then I can share it on my screen right here. So for example, group 6, I don't know if you were aware that I was going to ask you this, but group 6, the reporter for that group, would you be willing to just talk about your algorithm real quick?
I can go, I can explain. At the beginning, first of all, we didn't have group 6, so we copied and pasted group 5 slides, and we kind of went like step-by-step algorithm. And then on the next slide, we used repeat command to kind of make it more efficient. This is what we did here. And then we were gonna go to the next slide and make it more efficient. We didn't get a chance to do that. Probably repeat until, like a while loops. So as long as you can go forward, and then otherwise else turn right. And if turn right doesn't work here, you can't go forward and turn right, probably turn left, kind of like this.
Yes, great. So it does, it actually is nice in the sense that you get an opportunity to share work on screen easily when you're using the shared Google Docs, and you can call on the reporters just like you would in the classroom environment. The other thing, I think somebody in the earlier session when we were CS Awesome and Mobile CSP combined was asking about Pogo in a hybrid environment. I'm guessing most schools have social distancing requirements that even if you're in the classroom, you probably have to stay 6 feet away. So you probably are going to want to think about using some kind of shared document like this because they won't all be able to work on the same piece of paper. And so, I think like Pauline's point earlier, thinking about the online version first and then how you can adapt it for in the classroom is probably the better route to go here. All right. So that was just a quick demo. I'm sure there are more like concerns and questions about using online Pogo. Certainly feel free to send me an email or we can talk about them more in the Q&A. Just want to make sure Pauline's got some time here to go through the remote control and the pair programming opportunity.
So I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. And present. There we go. So with using Mobile CSP, you're also using App Inventor. And we definitely recommend that you are doing pair programming. And this is definitely something you can still do virtually with your students. We recommend using breakout rooms, just as you just did for the Pogo. Then taking time, we didn't do this because it was such a short time and we didn't want to take away from you all interacting with the activity, but we can visit the rooms as well, and we encourage you to do that while the students are working. Go into the breakout rooms, check in on them, ask them if they need help. You can also have the students ask for help. So notice when we go into breakout rooms again, that there should be an ask for help button that appears in some cases, and then you use the chat as well, as my understanding. You can just ask them to ask you for help. For pair programming, specifically with App Inventor, you can encourage students to share their screen. And so if you have the two roles of the driver and the navigator, you can ask one student to share their screen, and then they can use the remote control feature of Zoom to switch off with who is being the driver and controlling the mouse and doing the coding aspects. Encourage that they're switching often. You may have noticed in the Pogo breakout rooms, you were getting messages from Alexis that were coming up. So you can broadcast messages to all of the groups. So you could broadcast a message that says, hey, time to switch. You can also keep a timer that happens on your own computer and say, every 5 minutes or so, go ahead and switch the roles and then broadcast a message. Just make sure with pair programming, if you're doing it in Zoom with a remote control feature, that does mean that only one student is going to have the copy of the AIA file. Just remind them that whoever is sharing their screen and has the AIA file, they should send that file to their partner at the end. So we want to make sure that you are still using pair programming and encouraging that. Another option is just to share their screen and not even use the remote control feature as well. You could just have them talk it out as they're sharing. And that helps with the navigator role, in my opinion, because then they have to really articulate where they want the driver to go with the mouse and what they want them to do, because they wouldn't be able to control that person's screen themselves. So there is some couple of different ways that you could practice that. Thinking about how do you assist your students remotely. In a computer science course, it can be difficult when students are asking for help, and we'll ask them maybe to send a screenshot via email or share their file. Well, what if you could just jump on a Zoom call like this and have their students share their screen, and you can request remote control, or vice versa. You could share your screen and have them request remote control and be able to help them with their programming, or maybe they're doing an activity where they need help and they're struggling. You can use this remote control feature to help with that. So whether it's pair programming or you as a teacher assisting students with coding, you can use this feature. And you could also, maybe if you're comfortable, allow students during a live virtual synchronous session that you're having. Maybe there's an activity that you're doing and you want in front of the class a volunteer to do something on your screen. It could be just as simple as the annotation feature, where you call on someone to annotate the screen to interact with the lesson that you're delivering, or give them remote control and have them be able to type and maybe help solve a problem in front of the class. So we're actually going to try this out. We're going to have you go into your pair programming breakout rooms in just a minute here. I want to show you an example before you do it so you can see it. So what I'm going to do is close out of this here for a second. And I want to show you, so App Inventor has a login that you can go to without having to have the students log in. They can use it without an account. If your school is having privacy, student data privacy concerns, they can also use a code to enter and revisit a recent session that they had been in. So I'm just going to go into continue without an account. And it will log me in. So it warns you, here's the code that it gives you, and that's the code that you could make note of and use that to sign in again later. I'm going to go through these here, and they have the tutorials. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a blank project and call it pair programming. And let's see here, maybe I'm just adding maybe a button and a label, and maybe when I click the button, we're going to have the label change to be a piece of text. Well, let's say Jen is my partner. Jen is now, hopefully, I don't know if you can see that message that's coming up, but I'm getting a message that says, Jennifer Rosato is requesting remote control of your screen. You can regain control at any time by clicking on your own screen. So as the sharer, you have the default. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit approve, and I'm going to let go. My hands are not on my computer, and Jen is going to control my screen. So she's the driver, and I say, okay, Jen, as the navigator, could you create a button click that maybe sets the label's text to say Mobile CSP when the button is clicked? So Jen is completely controlling my screen right now.
I am. I will say it's a little bit slow, and maybe it's my old eyes, but making sure that things get clicked in.
The other thing I want to mention while Jen is doing this is that if you are having trouble seeing, right, I know App Inventor has a zoom in feature, but you also, as Zoom viewers, you have the option to do view option and then zoom ratio, where you can choose to zoom into the person's screen if you're having trouble seeing. So that's something you could be trying as well. Okay.
There you go. I'm all set.
Awesome. And so Jen, it would be Jen's responsibility to say, Pauline, I need access to the file. It's on your computer. Go to projects and download the AIA file, and then I would send it to her via email, and she could upload it into App Inventor to continue working on it later. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and want to take control back. Thank you. And then I'm going to come back here. We're going to split you up into your groups. I just want to grab this link real quick before sharing for you and put this in the chat. So that is the link to the App Inventor login without an account. Okay. And Alexis is going to send you into a breakout room, and your goal in the next several minutes is to practice sharing your screen. Maybe open up App Inventor and just play around maybe with the designer and the block setter. You don't have to create anything in particular, just take turns being able to control. And remember, ask for help. If you need help, give it a try.
There were a bunch of teachers who, when they saw Jen take control of your screen, I just saw their faces go, what? You can do that?
How did it go? Maybe use the reactions at the bottom. Good, bad. I see Jocelyn doing thumbs up. Yeah. Pretty cool, right? And I do want to say, right, we do know that we need to really think before using this and make a really good informed decision about how that could be used. All of us were definitely, hopefully, playing nice and not searching through anyone's computers. But if that, that were to happen, you as the sharer, you have the default, you can take back control of your screen, and you can stop the other person from interacting with it if they tried to do something that was inappropriate. But still, I know some of us are in our school systems are like, let's not even bother with that. So like I was with Ned and I were talking about the example of how just being able to share your screen, like Google Meets doesn't have this feature of remote control, but you can still share your screen and pair program together without having the other person take control. It's just a really nice feature, I think, in my opinion, if you are willing and able to do that. Even if you are only doing it as the teacher to assist your students, it's still very helpful for them. So Do we want to address the parking lot questions? So I think we went through them while you were in the breakout rooms. We had at least one person who used the help also. I want to say that. You asked for help while you were in the breakout room, so that was awesome. And we got right in there and helped you out. And then I think, Jen, you had the Pogo question, right, for the parking lot?
Yep, and I think we've got that answered unless other folks had other questions related to, you know, anything we shared today.
Yep. So that is all that I have. I don't know if Jen or Alexis has anything, or if anyone has any questions for us.
Maybe just a little bit about the sentiment that Lou and I were sharing. I think it's really easy, especially with the programming tasks, to get frustrated when you're working at home alone on things. You know, if you might take a flipped approach to your synchronous sessions and ask students to do work ahead of time. So setting classroom culture of like, how do you get help in an online environment and how long do you spend, you know, when is your struggle no longer productive, and when do you need to start asking for help so that they don't go down this hole of spending like 2-3 hours working on an app and just not making progress. So.
I have a quick question. We did this work and it worked really well, the code.app inventor thing, which it seems to work better than it used to. Like we closed Windows and it was remembered in a cookie and things. So that was good. But now that we've done, do you have advice for like the best way to like share AIA files now that we've been working collaboratively? Is there a best practice for that?
I mean, Pauline, you can jump in here too. I mean, I think really it's just about downloading the file and either emailing it to each other, or maybe they have a shared Google Drive that they're doing group work in and they post it there. If you have something like that, or even as you're downloading files, email keeps a little better track of like which is the most recent versus earlier version. So maybe like adding names to files. And Pauline, I don't remember exactly the versioning part in App Inventor. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit too, like if you were trading AI files back and forth a fair amount.
Yeah, and when you go to the screen where you set the icon, the screen properties, there's the version. You can use that. I personally haven't used it for sharing things necessarily back and forth, but more so with edits that were being made, hence version. But you could change the name there. I think the one thing to be mindful of here is to be careful with the naming conventions of the files, because if they are repeatedly downloading the same one, it's going to put those special characters in there and then students might get frustrated. So definitely something that you would want to show them how to do, right? And demonstrate that so they understand some of the challenges that they might face. Even if it's not on their end, maybe it's someone that sent it to them that had a special character, and that's something that they need to look out for. Contrary to what Jen said, I think Google Drive is actually getting a little bit better with the versions, because when you upload something with the same name, it asks you if it wants to replace it. So my instinct would have been I would prefer Google Drive, because then they can share that file folder that they're using with you and their partner, and you can go in and see what they're doing instead of having to worry about the student remembering to include you on an email, because it's very easy for them to forget. I also am not quite sure with Google Classroom, can others, like if you have students submit in Google Classroom, can you make it so that way they can see each other's, like if they're collaborating on an assignment? So it's just between you and the teacher. Yeah, so I don't know if there's a way that you could somehow think of how to use Google Classroom to help with that process, but I would recommend Google Drive so that way you and the students have access.
The one thing I would recommend is if you have a class spreadsheet and at the end of some period of time you have the kids put the AIA file in a shared drive and then put the link to that document in that spreadsheet, then it's available for anyone else. And if they also put the code in there, that would help as well.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. I am happy to stick around if anybody has other questions, or feel free to email us at info@mobile-csp.org. You also, I know most of you have used the group that we have, the Teaching Mobile CSP group. Make sure you're getting emails, even if it's just the digest, so you stay up to date with all of our newsletters that Alexis will be helping send out throughout the year, and keeping in touch with us as you go through. And please, if there's something you need, ask, right? In many cases, there may be someone else who needs it too. And if it hasn't already been created and shared, we can try to help collaborate on something together.
Pauline, I have a question about linking the assignments or practices either in Mobile CSP or CS Awesome to Canvas, because we are moving to Canvas, and I prefer the students to have links to assignments, some of the quizzes or assignments on Canvas, rather than jumping back and forth between the two websites. Is there a way? Because I know CodeHS gives us a code for each activity, so I can link it, but is there a way to link the practices or assignments on Canvas?
I don't know that we have done that with Mobile CSP. Like I shared the Mobile CSP version that one of our facilitators has worked on. And I think that really is set up as they are going over to our main Google Course Builder site where we host the materials, and it's not integrated or embedded in Canvas directly. With CS Awesome, I don't have the latest details, but there has been some conversation about they're working on trying to find a way so that way you could have, I believe the letter, there's so many acronyms, you all. I think it was like LTI or something that you can convert in between the different learning management systems. Maybe Jen knows what it is, but they're working on that to maybe be able to do that, but it hasn't been done that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks all.